I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast. All right, welcome. This is AK. I actually know AK. I've known him for, I think I probably met you close to 10 years ago.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, I used to be involved in Minnesota politics. I was the chair of Minnesota College Republicans, but a few years before I was the chair, AK was the chair of Minnesota College Republicans. So I believe we connected that way. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your background and what you do, who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like Amanda, like you've already said, right? You and I connected because I used to be the chair of the Minnesota College Republicans, and I've always thought it was important to try and stay connected in some way, shape, or form to kind of the next handful of chairs after me. And so, because I was still running in that group, you and I our paths crossed a few times, but kind of my, if you want to say who I am and what I do. So right now I make overtly political videos. TikTok's kind of where my biggest following is. But I post kind of cross-platform on X, Instagram, Facebook. I've tried doing YouTube Shorts, but there's like a constraint of how long your videos can be, and that's way too much work for me. But I personally like to have I put out a perspective about things that happen in the news, whether that's political, cultural. I'm a pretty well-rounded person, and so I'm fascinated with the way that people think about things. And when it comes to the news, you're getting this perspective that's kind of a narrative that's being fed. And I've come to realize that this is a true thing. And I'm not saying specifically it's always going to be to the left or to the right, because there are definitely news sources that are to the right that are pushing a narrative, just like there's news sources to the left. But I will say that the main thing that I've observed is that the majority of narratives are coming from a left perspective and what most people on the right call the mainstream news. And I've actually, I've heard some disaffected, former liberals call it mainstream corporate news. And I actually like that term. So where I come into this equation is I love people. I love politics. I love to understand how things work. And so when I make my content, it comes from that perspective. And then on top of all of that, I'm kind of a weird dude. I have a weird sense of humor. And so I'd like to kind of put that out there as well. So if you go and you check out my videos, you'll see me talking about political, cultural issues, and then you'll see something really weird where it's like a joke. But I feel that that's relevant as well. But that's kind of who I am. I'm a person that loves the idea of individualism, freedom. I love the United States of America. I think we are the greatest nation that has ever existed. And I do believe that there are many allies that, in my honest opinion, we need to try and support because they have values that align with us. And Israel is one of those that I believe that the United States has a strong obligation and responsibility. And I also think that it actually makes our country better. And so in that context, I know that you have been talking a lot about these issues, and I find a lot of salience, and I think it's very important because so many people, because again, at the beginning I said you have this kind of mainstream narrative that's pushed, and all of that kind of shades people's perspective on what is happening. And so this is kind of a really good place where, for myself, I've made videos breaking down the narratives that are being pushed that are false and wrong. And that's kind of how I think I can be relevant to your audience and to your listeners.
Thank you. Well, I'm gonna link AK all of his profiles on this podcast, so everyone can go follow him and check him out. He's awesome. I've followed him for years, like just from knowing you, but also like the TikToks you make and stuff I've always really liked too. So
Thank you.
guys should all go definitely check him out. I want to get to the first. So I have these like things, I make the videos and, you know, I make them either responding to comments or I'll see something and I'll make a video about that. And then I also have these kind of long form, I can't draw out the thought really. And so I just think about them. And one of the ones that I've been obsessed with for maybe like the past couple weeks is that I found, this is maybe a little bit of a left turn, I have found that men in our country do not understand war at all. Like the people, women too, but I expect that more from women, I guess, than from men. But the comments that I get, and I'm sure you get too, of people who are just like, they don't seem to understand what a war is, why a country would wage one, why that a country has a right to wage one, that the way that most militaries, at least that America would align itself with, act in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. From a political and cultural perspective, do you have any opinion about that? Like, do you see that too? And how do you think we get rid of that if you think it exists?
Yeah, so there's a famous quote, right? And ultimately it comes down to like, hard times make strong men, right? And then strong men make easy times make weak men. And this is kind of the cycle. I completely butchered what the quote is, but the idea is pretty true, right? Like if you look back to human history, during World War II, right, and even World War I leading up into World War II, men in this country understood, because the world was very, very hard, what it takes to actually try and have a good life, right? Quality for your nation, for your people. And we saw the atrocities that occurred on a global scale, but more specifically to the folks that went and served and volunteered, and in cases where they got drafted where they didn't really want to go, they understood like, what is it to actually lose and fight against people that want to destroy everything about you. And so that, experience shaped the next generation where they're like, yeah, here are these things. This is why it's important to fight for these things. And unfortunately, fortunately, right? Because like, this is the weirdest thing. Because our generation, and I'm specifically talking about millennials and then Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they haven't had to experience truly the atrocities of war. Of course, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've had plenty of men and women that went over there and have suffered all types of atrocities, but that scale and magnitude is nowhere near what it was during World War I and World War II. And so I think that's kind of that function that in the United States, we have this very naive perspective because we've been blessed enough to not have to live under this idea that there is an enemy that is at our doorstep that is attacking us, that wants us dead on a regular basis. Like everything that happened in the Middle East, I don't think that the outcome of it was really great, but that was a different place, right? Like every day when you're going to work from 2001 until, the official box pullout by Biden, you weren't sitting there when you go to school, when you're at work, thinking about the war effort. That's not a thing. But all of American life was centered around that during World War I and World War II. So that's kind of the way that I view it. But to more your perspective, how sometimes it boggles your mind is people have such a not even basic understanding of what war is and why war happens, right? Like, I think there's this perspective that our armed services, it's like, it's such a small percentage of our population. So people also aren't really connected to it. Whereas the purpose of learning and being trained to fight in a military is that you need to be able to destroy those that want to destroy you. And so what goes into that process is you want to make sure that your side wins. Well, with this inclusion of American values and principles and Western values and principles, we started to say, well, we need to do certain things that are considered just. Before this, there was no justness, right? Like you just went to destroy your enemy. And sometimes you had to entice your military. You would say, whatever we capture, it's yours. You can take whatever you want. But we decided, that's not okay. We need to develop rules of engagement. and things that we can and can't do. And so the reality still exists that you're still going and having to defend against those that want to take your way of life, of your country, of your citizens. So there's going to be a brutality to it because, listen, if you've ever been in a physical altercation against someone that truly wants to harm you, it is very difficult to stop them. And this even bleeds into like conversations talking about how law enforcement engages with people when someone's like, oh, why can't you just take them down? You don't understand, like, if someone wants to end your life, you have to use a lot of energy. And most of the time, in order to stop someone that wants to take your life, you have to take their life. If there was a much easier way to make that happen without that, people would love that. But when someone is determined and they want to take your life, it is very difficult to stop them. Now, you produce that on a mass scale, and then you start involving weapons that can cause a lot of damage. This is where you go. And so, to your point, people have this like naive understanding that if somehow, if Israel could be more precise and targeted with technology that doesn't exist, where they could look at a building and send out some type of weaponry that will only target the terrorists hiding in the building, Israel would love to use that because they want to mitigate all types of casualties, but those don't exist. And so you have to use the framework that you have, which means that if you are going after a target that is hiding itself amongst civilian population, you are going to have civilian casualties. But the alternative is that you just allow your people and your nation to be decimated, killed, and much, much worse.
Right. Well, that's like, you just stated that so well. But this is the thing that I'm like fascinated by. There's no political solution to a group of men who for 20 years have believed that it's okay for them to strap on a suicide vest and go into another country, and they don't care if they kill themselves as long as they kill Jews. So, or Israelis, or anyone they can get their hands on over there that they deemed an occupier. And a lot of that's because their education system, like, if they're willing to go to that length, there's no sort of like reform. And you can't have a political solution with people like that. And that's unfortunate, and it sucks. And it's why the terrorist groups need to be rooted out. And there's more than just Hamas that needs to be rooted out. But you can't, there's no political solution to that level of hatred. So either you kill them or they come and kill you. And what you said is true too about weaponry. Like, there's no bomb or bullet that only kills terrorists.
Right.
If they're going to hide in civilian areas, that either Israel chooses not to respond at all, which is preposterous, or they respond and there are civilian casualties. And what we're seeing out of this war, I mean, for everyone saying they're carpet bombing or indiscriminately bombing, the last figure I saw from an Arab news station, like I believe Al Jazeera, said Israel's dropped 90 pound, like tonnage pounds or whatever, of bombs on Gaza. Well, if you just think one death per ton, that would, I mean, which there would probably be a lot more, then the civilian casualties would be much, much, much higher if it was indiscriminate. But of course, they are targeting correctly. And I believe even the IDF said they're at like a 2-to-1 casualty rate of civilians to terrorists, which is pretty good. That's about World War II level. And for a city war, that's not, I mean, every civilian casualty is bad, but for a city war, that's pretty good. So I just think that people don't understand these things, and I don't know how we teach these things, because most men, I think, honestly, like under 30 especially, they learn about what war is from like Call of Duty. And like, that's not how you learn, or a movie. So it's kind of, I don't know if there's a solution to that.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something that you said, which I think deserves just kind of a little bit further explanation. So when you think about the amount of casualties that you're going to have, right? If you're actually trying to mitigate the amount of casualties that you have, it requires you to be precise. And it actually does mean that you're putting your own people in greater harm. So like, understand like the way that our targeting systems work. Israel gives the United States a ton of military technology. And that's why it's such a great partnership with Israel. Like, just from a purely, what's in it for me type of perspective, the aid that we give, we get a bunch of military technology because Israel's fortunately been able to develop a ton of great military technology because they are under constant attack of being wiped out by their neighbors. on a large mass scale. But the thing that requires is that you have to have, some type of exposure to an enemy to verify, okay, this place has this, and the intelligence that goes into that, the human intelligence, is significant. Like Mossad has agents everywhere, so they can better have an estimation of the targets they're going after. So that's what's so just mind baffling is if you truly thought that Israel was being indiscriminate, you would already have hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties, literally hundreds of thousands. And this could be over relatively quickly if they didn't care. The amount of again, calm and strategy that has gone into these operations is significant, and people don't understand it. The other thing that you said that I think is worth revisiting is this kind of perspective, because we have so many people that don't understand these basics of war. I think it's intentional, right? And what I mean by that is that there's this mindset that has persisted that war in and of itself is a tool that should never be used. And I think there's this mentality that then if you don't teach about war, then there'll be less likelihood that war will happen. And I just think that this is a pie in the sky utopian just dream that people have. And it's actually made us weaker. Like right now, if God forbid the worst of the worst happens and China attacks directly, or Russia, or Iran, or North Korea, and we actually had to institute a draft, that to me is scary. Now, I will say that our military is really good at getting people trained relatively quickly from a civilian population. It still does worry me because I'm also a little bit concerned about the readiness of those that are currently in the military. But here's the deal, right? To kind of go back to this point, when it comes to can we change anything about our willingness of our men in this country to be able to have a better understanding, we can, but it's going to be difficult. And so the best thing that can happen is folks like us being able to have these conversations and break down these realities. Because if we just leave it to the current institutions, that's probably not going to happen for a whole multitude of reasons, ideological differences that persist in our institutions. So it's going to be up to us, to your listeners, to sharing messages, having these conversations. And I also wanted to mention this as well. So when you talk about this conflict of how do you stop, is there a political solution to stopping people that want to take your life? The answer is you're right. There isn't an answer. There isn't a solution. But I do think this is important, and this is a part that is rarely talked about because it can maybe seem very mean-spirited. I believe in people's free will. Even if you are in an untenable situation, I believe it's up to the people to make a decision. And your inability or desire to protect yourself and to be ruled by tyrants, I do believe still comes back to the people in a certain regard. Okay, in the United States, right, our forefathers, right, the people that founded this country said, we've had enough with the British Empire, and we had a violent revolution. We had to overthrow the current existing structure because we did not believe that they were just. This has happened all across humanity throughout time, that if you don't want what is currently ruling you, it's up to the people that live there to do it themselves. And I think that this aspect gets overlooked, and I've been bringing this up to people, that if you say, okay, well, if you look at these polls, some of them say that it's 50% of the people in Gaza. Some polls say that, no, it's only 30% and blah, blah, blah. The question is there an active rebellion that is going on a mass scale? No, there is not. And I think that means something. Now, this doesn't mean that I think that every person that is in Gaza deserves to die, because that is barbaric. That's inhumane. Thankfully, because we are a free people in the West, we can say that we have the luxury. But if we look through history, we would say you are complicit for allowing this government to exist. So I just think that it's important that you have to take some of that responsibility. And it has to go back to the people, that they allow this government to exist. So I like the idea when I hear people say free Palestine from Hamas. That's fantastic, but it will take the people that live there to actually liberate themselves. And I know right now that there's a bunch of Western forces that would 100% support that happen, but there just isn't that same will. So then we go back to, because that doesn't exist from a political viewpoint, a solution doesn't exist politically for these two sides, it's going to be, well, we have to come after from a military perspective. When I say we, I'm talking about Israel. We have to go after militarily to accomplish their mission of decimating Hamas. And then once all of those fighters are removed from the board, then there's going to be some conversations about what happens next. Or, again, the people need to be able to take it back over. And, again, people don't like to talk about that because it seems like mean-spirited to say, well, if you have this perspective that if you are an average person that lives in Gaza, that you are being oppressed by Hamas. I know that there is some truth to that they are brutal because it's terrorists. But people need to also take some accountability. So I just think it's important to throw that out there that, when it comes to solutions, there's only one that can come from an outside force, and that is what Israel is doing. But there is an inside force that can happen that hasn't been happening. So I think we need to be mindful.
Because also, I mean, that's another comment I've been inundated with, and they're reporting me because I posted the pictures of that group of men who surrendered. And Israel and other, like the Canadian Army, the U.S. Army, we always, when terrorists surrender, we strip them down to make sure they're not wearing suicide vests. That's standard practice because they do that, right? So in order to protect all of those other people's lives in that crowd, but also the soldiers, and that's who they need to protect the most, is themselves. They strip them down. And people are saying that I'm so inhumane to post videos like that. It's public degradation. First of all, why do we care for publicly degrading terrorists? They're more upset about that than they are about what Hamas did to the women on October 7th and that going on, which is absurd to me. But also there's a component too of the latest number I saw, this is probably off, is that 80% of Gaza believes that what Hamas did on October 7th was okay. We can get into that the Arab media, by and large, has not showed what actually happened. They're making it sound like it's any other conflict. And us in the West, we understand that what Hamas did, what they filmed themselves doing, is it would make the Nazis uncomfortable to watch that level of barbarity. It's crazy. But there needs to be some level. They're dropping leaflets on them showing like we're flushing out the tunnels. Like there is a level of like psychological warfare to this too, because the people who support Hamas need to realize like you're not going to get where you want to go anymore. And they say that that's not okay. And so it seems like their only solution is like you have to let Hamas continue. And I'm sorry, but that's just, no one else would be expected to live next to a neighbor that brutal. No one.
Yeah, no, and I actually had a conversation with my brother because my brother's always been like a leftist center type of guy. And, we had this conversation and if you want to go and have the perspective that Israel should have never, the charter should have never been signed to create the state of Israel, if that's your perspective, which I hear a lot from people that support, the pro-Palestinian side, that doesn't matter because it's in the truth is Israel does exist. So then what do you do with it? And then I ask a very simple question. Point to me, like right now, go and just Google to your heart's content. Has there ever been a nation that was formed that voluntarily dissolved in which a force that wanted them to be destroyed, if the people continue to exist in that area? The answer is never been done. So why would you create this scenario that has never happened? Because then what you are saying is that you believe that the Israeli people deserve to be sacrificed, and whatever happens to them, let that happen to them. And that to me is absurd. Second point, right? It's very simple. If every single Israeli laid down every weapon they had access to and said, we're going to dissolve all the borders, and you know what? We're going to allow either the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, they're going to be the ruling government. What would happen to every Israeli that I consider myself, let's say you just flip the roles, right? There's the people that live in Gaza and West Bank say, I'm a Palestinian. And let's say that the people that were Israeli said, I'm an Israeli, but the government that existed that controlled everything was, again, Palestinian Authority or Hamas. What do you think would happen to every person that out loud said, I'm an Israeli? They would be killed. There was no question. And if you want any proof, just go look at any time there's a skirmish in which, again, people that are part of the Palestinian Authority that are invading into the area of Israel or Hamas or the PIJ, they indiscriminately kill as many Israelis as possible. So that is a truth and a reality, right? You don't have to play these mind games of like, oh, should Israel exist or whatever, because they do exist. So the question is, if you make them no longer exist, what happens to all those people? So then you are actually choosing and saying, without saying it directly, that you're okay with the mass slaughter of Israelis. And let's be also candid, there's this hatred of Jewish people that will occur. And so you're saying that in your mind would be more just than honestly, the tactical missions that are happening right now with the IDF, where they're trying to minimize casualties. But the truth is that there's a lot of civilians that are mixed into the population because Hamas does that on purpose, right? You're saying that you would rather have that. So the question is, do you want basically all Israelis to die, or do you want to have a measured response in which you try and get rid of all of the Hamas terrorists, and that there's going to be some other? And I think that, again, in a just world, all right, you're going to say, I want the least amount of death. Because if you allow Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to have control, you will see mass death on a scale that we haven't seen, honestly, since World War II or since, Maoist China. That's the levels that you're going to have to go to, or Stalin's Russia, in order to see that. That's the type of death you would see on an almost instantaneous scale if, again, Israel just laid down all their weapons. And that's a truth that no one wants to talk about, because that's what will happen. And if you're going to be honest with it, at least if you say, yep, I think that's fair, now we can put you in the category of you're a monster that believes that genocide is justified.
It's crazy because in America, there's such a difference between the pro-Palestinian people here and the pro-Palestinian people over there. I think I already said that. But what's crazy to me is over there, you can't have a theoretical debate about well, but if this had happened or if this didn't happen, it should be this way. You can't have a theoretical debate when a jihadist is at your throat wanting to kill you. And they don't just want to kill Jews. They want to kill Westerners. They would want to kill me because I'm not covering my hair. They want to kill people of a darker skin tone. They don't like black people there. No, they don't.
They hate black people. Honestly, it's crazy.
If you look at the cartoons they made of Condoleezza Rice, they couldn't believe a woman who was black was having any say in what was going on over there, because around Bush's administration is when she was in charge, and when the elections were going on. You can't have a theoretical debate. It's such a privileged position for people in America to be because what they'll say is well, but Hamas wouldn't exist if it weren't for the occupation. And that's dumb because Israel pulled out in 2005 and has kind of left them alone. Besides overseeing what they import to make sure they don't import, weapons, and still some get through the tunnels under Egypt and or from Egypt. But still, you can't have a theoretical debate with that because, okay, yeah, what you're saying, okay, sure, we go back, theoretically, Israel doesn't exist or never exist, whatever. Well, it doesn't change what's going on right now. Correct. And right now, the two choices we have are allow Hamas to continue or allow Israel to continue. And Hamas is a welfare state. I mean, Gaza's a welfare state. So is the West Bank. All of the money goes to the leaders. It doesn't go to the people. So what? Israel, an actual functioning country, is just going to lay down their arms to allow a failed state to take over? It doesn't make sense. But that's one of the things that just Americans, and we're the greatest country in the world, I agree with you, but we have this sentiment where we know better. And it's crazy to me that these privileged college kids and protesters in America think that we know better than them on how to mitigate loss of life. It's crazy to me. But that takes me to veer off more from what's going on over there to what's going on here. We've seen these pro-Palestine rallies, these that have honestly turned into riots. They've killed people. They killed that guy who had just had the Israeli flag out in California. They're chanting genocidal chants against Israel, but then they're mad saying that Israel's committing a genocide. So it's clear that they feel a certain type of way here. And we've dealt with that on a different scale with these kind of crazy riots here in the summer of 2020 and afterwards. We're both from Minneapolis, around Minneapolis. So the fallout after the death of George Floyd had these huge riots here. And I lived in Uptown during it. So I was on I've not told the story, I think. I was on the roof of my apartment building watching them. I lived like right at, I don't know if I should say where I lived, the corner of Lake Street and Hennepin. And I watched them loot like during all of that. And I think what we can speak to a little bit is those riots very quickly devolved from like justice for what happened in that police killing to it very quickly went to just like a bunch of people who wanted to cause chaos. And I have recognized that the people at these Palestine rallies, a lot of them it's the same crowd. They don't really care about Palestine like they didn't really care about George Floyd. They want to cause chaos. And I would argue that Minneapolis has not really recovered from the summer of 20. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit something that I think it's intuitive to those of us that are on the right, that are politically active, because we understand that there is an ideology that connects the people that are part of the BLM movement with people that are part of the pro-Palestine, free Palestine movement. There is an ideological connection. And I know that it doesn't seem obvious unless you understand where this comes from. So I do actually have a little bit of a caveat and a difference. So the people that were creating a lot of mass, damage and doing the looting and things like that aren't completely disconnected from the people that were part of BLM. The people that are part of BLM want to have chaos so they can have revolution, so they can change what they view as an unfair and unjust system. That is the perspective. And so they actually create circumstances and events that lead to the greatest impact of chaos. So you have a lot of stories. There was a lot of reporting. There was a New York Times that did a huge expose on it, where you had people that were embedded, and they would go and they would like go with these Antifa BLM cells that were kind of merging together. And there was an awareness that if you create kind of this opening and you encourage certain things, that you will have maximum impact of like really societal impact. So whether that's burning down an area, and this is the thing, it wasn't overt where they were like, hey, you go burn that thing down. It was like, hey, if we do these things, we know that this is the type of reaction we're going to get. If someone comes along and they bash open a window to a store, a bunch of people, again, this doesn't have to be coordinated or pointed out, are going to start jumping into the store, and you're going to get impact, right? So that ideological belief goes all the way through from BLM, Antifa, all the way through to the pro-Palestine movement. And it's the same exact thing. So it's like using people that feel that there's some injustice that's occurring. We'll call it like an average, everyday person that, here's this narrative that Israel is an occupying force and they are oppressors to the people that are the Palestinian ethnicity of people. They're going to say, yeah, they deserve to have justice. So there's going to be a majority of those people that are then fueled by the people that actually know that that's not true, but they believe that there's this oppression narrative that exists. And the only way to actually have any type of revolution is you have to get enough people involved in it. And so, this oppressive versus oppressed narrative is what the through line is. And I know that for some people, they're like, I don't get it. Like, how do you go from like police are oppressors to Israel is an oppressor? And it's because you have to say, well, here's a group of people in the BLM movement, right? Black Americans are being oppressed by, the police. And again, if you look over in Israel, that Israel is oppressing the people of the areas of Gaza and the West Bank. That's the narrative that is connected. And so in order to have a revolution, you have to support these ideas and beliefs that you get enough people on your side that will overthrow the existing status and structure. And so, like, again, when you talk about defund the police, right, and abolish the police, which are two things, like in Minneapolis, MPD 150 is what they're called. They are a police abolishment organization. Like, they don't want police to exist at all, right? That you can connect to the people that are calling for a ceasefire. Because if you abolish the police, defund the police, or you have a ceasefire, right, you are then allowing the oppressed, again, I don't believe they're oppressed, but the oppressed people to be able to then take back control. Because when a ceasefire happens, right, that allows Hamas and all of the terrorists and all their supporters to reorganize and figure out their next plan of attack. Because this has been happening, right? This has been happening for the past 20 years. That every time there's an incursion of terrorists that go and commit a bunch of terror and kill a bunch of people in Israel, and then there's a ceasefire because, Israel hits back hard and everyone starts complaining. There is a peace until guess who attacks every single time. And that's what happens. And so it's like this continued narrative. And right now, this is what we're seeing play out right in front of our eyes. So when someone's like, oh, I want a ceasefire, you have to ask, like, for what purpose? Like, are you going to, during that ceasefire, like, get rid of Hamas? Are you going to have an election that's going to end? But it's never. No, it's just like, oh, no, we just want the civilian deaths to stop. It's like, well, if the civilian deaths, which again are incidental to the main purpose of the IDF is doing, if those stop, and that means that Hamas is able to kind of reestablish the network, you're going to see more Israelis die. That's just what's going to happen. So it's that same thing, and I think it's important for people to try and connect these two understanding that there's this ideological belief of this oppressed versus oppressor narrative that exists in BLM all the way through to the Free Palestine movement.
Totally. Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird that like continues on, and that it's, yeah. And a lot of it too, I mean, it's just, I don't know if it's just like people, young kids who just like want to feel something, so they go to these rallies and stuff, but I don't know if you listened to the recent episode I had with Michael Pregent from Hudson Institute. He was saying that,
you did a great job.
I'm so glad he came on. But he was saying that like the terrorist organizations aren't even recruiting like immigrants to America anymore, like Arab immigrants. They're recruiting people from these BLM and Antifa. And like, what are we going to do about that? And is it going to have to hit us in the face for us to understand? Are we going to let it go that far? I never thought I would see a police precinct fall to protesters in my lifetime in the United States. But that happened at the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis. And that was, a couple miles from my house at the time. So it's like, I don't know how we move on from this, really.
Yeah. So for me, I'm always like, I'm a very optimistic guy, right? Just as a little bit of background. So I was sent to Israel with APAC, student allies, campus allies, I should say. And so like, I have this deep understanding of this relationship between the United States and Israel. But I also, because I've been involved in politics, I've seen this anti-Semitic, like Jewish hatred that's wrapped up into like the hatred of Israel, where you have all this overlap and cross. And I've seen this for like, honestly, like since I was at the University of Minnesota, I graduated in 20. I've seen it that entire time. And it's just kind of been there under the surface, but it finally bubbled up and over. And so you started to see this bifurcation that's happening within the Democratic Party here in Minnesota. We have Senator Ron Ladd, and he came out and he was just like, anyone that supports unaliving people and sexually assaulting women and children, like that's a bad thing. And people are like, how dare you say that? And it's like, this is a reality. And you had a bunch of Democrats and members of the DSA that support Democrats come out in letters saying like, how dare, this is Islamophobic and all this crazy stuff, right? But you're seeing this happen within Democrats. And so when I say like I'm an optimistic person, I see that there's a potential that we can get back to a level of normalcy. Listen, I don't expect that if you're a Democrat or on the left, that you're going to become like some, flag waving American patriot, MAGA, wearing American flag. Like I got the American flag behind me. I literally wear this hat like almost every day. I love this country. I don't expect you to do that. Like if you do, awesome. I hope you do. But a lot of you are just like, no, I still have these very democratic values. Like I'm very liberal in my perspective of how I perceive the way that society should be ran. But can we do that and be like, but we think that terrorism is bad? Like that's what I hope we can get to, right? It is like let's just be against terrorism, and believe that there's better solutions to trying to find an equal place. Because here's the thing: there's a lot of people in Israel and in the United States that support some type of two-state solution, or at least they did until October 7th. Right? There's a hope for a lot of folks that there can still be something. There is this strong belief that they want to find something that's more tenable than what has happened. But at this point, like this is what the terrorism does, is that it kills that entire conversation and idea until you can root out all of the terrorists that overtly want to murder all Israelis, right? Like until that happens, you can't even have a conversation about a two-state solution.
Oh.
Yeah. So ultimately, right, you have, until you're able to get rid of the terrorists that want to destroy all Israelis, you can't have even an honest conversation about a two-state solution, because at this point, both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas have shown that if they have power, they will use it to just kill a bunch of Israelis. So you're just in this untenable position. So my hope is, right, and this is where my optimism comes from, is that people are starting to open their eyes that are on the left, that view yourselves as Democrats or liberals, that there is an element that exists within your party that you have empowered. You have to remove them. And this goes back to what I said earlier. As an outsider, I can't remove anyone from another group unless I'm brutal. And I don't think we want to see, Republicans saying like there's an ideological test to be an American citizen or anything like that. No. Like we will if we got to. I think that within the Democratic Party, you need to disempower people that have these viewpoints. And that you have to clean and keep up your own house. So that's my hope. I think that we will find a solution in that way, where it's like, you're still going to be a Democrat, you're still going to have all these liberal values in society, because believe me, on the right, we have our limits. And I don't think anyone wants to see that. But if the option is we get attacked by a bunch of cells that are in the United States, we will crack down on the right, because we value our liberty and freedom that much. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm not too concerned. I want to minimize all possible damage and loss of human life, but we're not going to allow that to happen on the right. So on the left, it's kind of up to you guys to clean up your own house. And what I mean by clean up is stop voting for people that have these beliefs. Stop voting them in your local political party. That's not going to exist, but they're going to have no power. So we don't really have to worry about it. It's empowering these folks. That's when they're actually able to make moves within the government, because you can't steal someone's ideas, right? This is a thing that we've known to be true. If you have bad, naughty ideas and beliefs, I can't, silence you that you no longer believe in these things. But if I take away your power by not supporting you, then you're not going to be able to really do anything. You're going to still have your bad ideas, but you're going to have no power. And so that to me is my optimistic view about this, is that I do think that people on the left are waking up and saying, whoa, we need to again, disempower these people. And that's what I think the most likely outcome is going to be. So I'm hopeful for it. Really, truly am.
I mean, that's started to happen even with Ilhan Omar, our hometown lovely congresswoman who has a history of some not so savory remarks about Jewish people. She had that tweet that she refused to take down that said that the Jews had hypnotized the world, and she wouldn't take that down. She was a member of Congress, and she tweeted that in 2020. But I think we've seen that they've tried to remove her from office. She almost lost that last primary to a guy who's still a Democrat. Yeah. Still a Democrat, but just didn't support, terrorism. And I hope we can get to a place with that in the Democratic Party. The last question I think I have for you, I didn't know you went on Campus Allies. So I went on a trip with AIPAC too. So what we're talking about, AIPAC is America's pro-Israel lobbying group, and it is not at all funded by the Israeli government. It's funded by Americans who want there to be a strong relationship between America and Israel. There's a lot of reasons why countries would want that. And AIPAC does these trips for a lot of different groups of people, but what we're talking about is they do trips for college activists, just political activists, but also pro-Israel activists. So I went on one that's similar but a little bit different. I think Campus Allies had like people who were involved in Hillels on campus as well as college Republicans and college Democrats. Mine didn't have any Jewish activists on it. It was just college Republicans and college Democrats. It's a dumb technicality. I don't even know why I made it, but or like differentiated that. But I want to talk about this because there's this narrative that AIPAC like runs the government and runs the world, and it's so far from the truth. So can you talk a little bit about the trip that you went on? And then I'm going to ask some other questions about it.
Yeah. So yeah, I love the conspiracy, right? Where people are like, oh, AIPAC. Well, because AIPAC is the most powerful lobby in the United States. But that's because the issue that they're supporting is so powerful to the United States. Like, this is why I said before, like what we give in aid to Israel, like people are like, oh, cut off aid to Israel. Listen, if we got nothing in return, I can understand. I really could. Because there's a lot of countries that we give aid to that we get nothing from. The amount of military technology and other types of technology, like I created this list, like it's absurd how much technology we have got from Israel because of this relationship. It is helpful to us. So if you have one of the most important relationships that you can have when it comes to getting, giving aid and getting something, it would make sense that you would have one of the most powerful lobby groups that exist, especially when you have so many American citizens that also are Israeli citizens, right? So I just love when people are like, oh, these conspiracies. My experience was on that trip, there were plenty of people that were still relatively skeptical about what, the types of things that Israel does. And I will say that the majority of people on my trip were Democrats. Like, I remember we went, where was it? We went to go and view the security border, right? And I remember there's a gal who right now, okay, she's like a Democrat, like state rep in New York. And she's like, I understand all of this, but like, why? Because like a bunch of us Republicans, we kept on being like, America. Every time we see a flag, we'd be like, America. She's like, why do you guys say America? And I was like, well, because we love America. And she's like, I just don't like it when you support one country so much. I'm like, well, we are AIPAC, America, Israel, so like you kind of have to like those two countries. She's like, well, I've been very vocal that I'm very critical of things that Israel's done. I'm like, yeah, I know, that's cool. And then we got in this larger conversation about being able to criticize Israel. And you know what we found? Is that like a lot of people were critical, but they still were like, but Israel has this right to exist and Israel's important to us. So that's the thing. It's not like this like marching order. Everything Israel does is great and amazing and fantastic. It was about understanding the complex dynamic within the country of Israel and its relationship with the United States. But that's kind of my biggest takeaway that I got, is that it's not this monolith. There's people all over the political spectrum that were on that trip. But the idea was, let's educate you on why this relationship is important to the United States, regardless of your other ideological feelings. And I think AIPAC has done an amazing job at making sure that that's the premise. It's not to brainwash you. It's just to like lay it all out. Like when I went to Yad Vashem, that was probably the most, like, I was like, yo, this is crazy. And like, just to understand like the entire history, it really just makes you have to me, an adoration for the tenacity of the Jewish people, and like wanting to have Israel created and everything that has gone into it. It's like, yeah, if I were in their shoes, I would hope that would happen as well, and that I'd have a powerful ally to support me. But yeah, that was kind of my overall perspective of going to Israel. That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's so interesting that you bring that up, because you can have people on the AIPAC trip who don't agree with everything that Israel does, but they were allowed to go on the trip. You have people who are state representatives in New York or Minnesota or wherever who can disagree with things about America, and that's allowed. You can have people, I mean, every weekend since, or maybe even every day since this war started, there have been massive protests in Israel protesting Bibi Netanyahu. Where you can't be a state representative or protest the government in any way, shape, or form? Gaza. You
That's right.
can't do that. You can't do
Yep.
that. So, I mean, I know the answer to this, but like when you went on the APAC trip, did they have a discussion with you like, hey, just so you know, if you go on this trip, you're never allowed to say anything bad about Israel? Or like, no.
No, not at all. And like awesome part, in my honest opinion, it's like, so we went tubing on the Jordan River, right? And it's like on this side of the river, right, is like Palestinian Authority controlled area. We went into the old city, and like they said, listen, like you guys are free to go shop wherever you want, but just be aware that if they see that you were in the APAC and you go to the Arab areas, things might get a little bit more dicey, right? And I'm like, I want to see, like, is that what it's like? And that's how it was, right? My name, I know I go by AK Kamar, and people can call me AK, but my first name is Abdul Rahman, okay? And so, like, my father, he passed away 10 years ago, but he practiced Islam. And I have an Arab name. My brothers have Arab names. Like, basically all the men in my family have Arab names. So I was like, I want to see, like, is there this, like, kind of different treatment? And my APAC name tag has my name. So on the Jewish side of things, right, where you have the larger Jewish populations in Jerusalem, in the old city, like they treated me just fine, right? They can obviously tell that I have darker skin and my name's Abdul Rahman is displayed. But when I did go to the Arab-controlled areas, like they're like, who are you with? And like, oh, APAC. And like they didn't want to do business with you. Now, again, these are Israelis, right? Some of them could be like, there's a lot of migrant workers, which again, for having an open air prison, and they literally allow like tens of, not hundreds of thousands of workers to come over every day and go back and forth and still live in a Hamas and Palestinian Authority controlled area. There's a whole different story. But my point is that I got to see firsthand that there is this kind of difference where, again, from Israel's perspective, they treat people that they know disagree with a lot of things they do, and they treat them well. Even those that they know like hate them will still treat them nicely, as long as like they're not like trying to damage or kill people, right? That's a whole other different line. You will never get that on the Palestinian or Gaza-controlled areas. Like Hamas, PIJ, doesn't matter. Like you will not have that ability to have that. And going to Bethlehem was another. It just blows your mind. It's like all people that are Palestinian, right, ethnically, but they call themselves, because they are Israelis, Arab Israelis, like they are, but they still love Israel, right? And like that's the thing that, again, you can't find any of that in any of the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas or Hamas-controlled areas. You won't find a little village that is controlled by a bunch of Jewish people. It doesn't exist.
I mean, I guess the settlements, but that's a whole other story. But
yeah. They don't have any power, right? They're not running the government. They're just people that are there, and they don't want them there.
No, they don't. Well, and that's another thing. So when we went into Ramallah, we had our tour bus we were on all week, and it had blue and white, and it's a bus. I didn't even think about the colors of the bus. And then the day we were going into Ramallah, they said, hey, we need to transfer buses, because if we take this bus into area A of the West Bank, like we're going to get hate crimed. And I was like, okay, so we can have the Palestinian colored and we're going to be fine. But we can't have the blue and white Israeli colored bus in the heart of Ramallah, because that we would get, like that kind of thing. Another thing is they always say the settlers are this impediment to peace. There's about 600,000 of them across area A of the West Bank. The fact that those Jews are there, that is this huge impediment to peace. But there's 2 million Arabs, ethnic Arabs, living in Israel, and that is never talked about as an impediment to peace. So I just think that's kind of interesting too. It kind of goes against their whole like genocide claims, ethnic cleansing claims.
Yeah,
but
and the open air prison claim too. Like I said, all of the migrant workers, like people don't understand, like every single day, Israel allows, like I said, hundreds of thousands, maybe it might be, whatever, to come in and work and then go back, right? Like that doesn't sound like a prison to me. I'm sorry. I've never heard of a prison unless you're like, whatever, like you have to turn in at night because you're like in a halfway house or something. But you would be like, yeah, I can leave whenever I want. I can go and work and earn money because, again, my own government is failing to do the basic things like provide me jobs. So I got to go over to Israel. And knowing all of that, they're still like, yeah, like open air prison and they want to, they just want to commit genocide. It's like, it's just so removed from reality on so many empirical points of view. Like you can just go through all of the data and just show like, here's why this perspective that Israel just hates all of the Palestinians and they want to murder them all and they want to subjugate and oppress them is just not true. And it never has been. And here's the greatest thing to like put this in your mind. Would anyone else expect that level? I know I couldn't do it. Like if Canada, like, we're in Minnesota, we're close to Canada. If Canada had groups that were launching rockets in Minnesota, and then the American government's like, yeah, you can let Canadian people come in and work. You're like, no, they don't get to come across at all. That's what I would be like. But Israel, again, just to show that they understand the dynamic that they're in, and they're trying so hard to give the people that live there the best opportunity, right, to be able to do something, and they're refusing to. You just have to put that in the proper context. Because again, in America, we would never say.
Right. And we can both say this as people who have been to those areas, Palestinian controlled areas, Israeli controlled areas. We've seen it with our own eyes. And AIPAC gave us that opportunity. They didn't brainwash us or force us like for the rest of your life, you're going to go to bat for Israel. Like it didn't exist. And I just think it's so funny when people act like that happens, because it doesn't. It's not.
Like I said, like, and even from like, I will say AIPAC, the people that are part of their policy team, they are so smart. Like they've been able to understand something that is intuitive, but they're able to just kind of make this message into a reality. That this relationship is so important between the United States and Israel. And it's like there's a part of me that just wishes that AIPAC would be able to have that impact on so many larger groups, but there's finite resources and everything like that. Because so many people just have no idea in the United States what this relationship's about, but more importantly, like about Israel, like understanding all of the history until the charter was signed, but understanding that the history of Israel goes back, again, thousands of years, right? Like, and I grew up, in this mixed religious household. My mother's Christian, dad practiced Islam, and they said, you guys can do whatever you want. And so I also have like this big biblical perspective, like AIPAC is like honoring and saying like, hey, like regardless of your religious beliefs, like let's go and check out all these different areas and all these different sites, So like we got to like go, in Bethlehem, we went up to what was it called? The Upper Church or whatever. Like they brought us on all these like cool places. They're AIPAC and they're bringing us to like Christian sites and stuff. And then Islamic sites, right? Like it was awesome. Like it was just amazing because again, it's about understanding why America should have this relationship with Israel. And that's what AIPAC's about. And I think any other nation would wish they could do the same thing if there was just this great misunderstanding. And that's because, the culture in Israel and, speaking Hebrew, right, it's like there is this disconnect that's way different than like the United States and Great Britain, right? Like we have a much greater understanding of each other. But even like honestly, my favorite part was when they brought us out to have dinner with the Druze people, the DRUZE. And like that was awesome. Like didn't know that they existed, that was a thing, So yeah.
That's so cool. Well, I think we got some really good stuff here. Is there anything else you want to promote? Like I said, I'm going to have all of your information in the description. Everyone go follow AK. But do you have anything else you want to promote?
No, I mean, just if you see any videos that, are intriguing or funny to you, please share them. And like I said, like my goal overall is to be able to break down all of these narratives. And so you'll see a lot of videos like that where I say, here's what the media narrative is, right? Like everyone remembers, right, the El Shaifa hospital, right? And like, oh, the IDF just wanted to bomb a civilian hospital and all this different stuff. So it's like you go through and you actually find all of the evidence that shows that that's not the case, but then you see that there's a narrative being formed, being pushed, that we want to create this disincentive for Americans to continue to support what Israel's doing and protecting itself. And so that's the type of videos I make. So if you see videos like that, again, like them, share them, comment, follow me. And that's just kind of the content that I put out there. So I'd appreciate that, but nothing specific. I will say this, though. If you're more interested in understanding this link between, the ideologies of, Black Lives Matter going through. Check out The Fall of Minneapolis. That's a documentary put on by Alpha News and Liz Collin. It will completely, it will open your eyes if you haven't followed the story about George Floyd and his death, and along with the trial of Derek Chauvin and the other officers, King Lane and Tao. Check out that video. I think it's on Rumble, and I think it's on YouTube now. But that will give you an understanding of how this media can be spun and this narrative can be created, that if you didn't follow it, and did digging deeper, and you only followed the mainstream narrative, you're going to probably have your mind blown, and then that might open you to understanding kind of why I make the content that I make.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for doing this.